I'm here, as Julie mentioned. I work for DMI, Dairy Management, the National Dairy Checkoff, and I'm one of the core team members on the foot and mouth disease cross-species communication team that's been in place since 2001. I joined around 2003. And it's a group of animal agricultural communicators that meet on a very regular basis and work together to create resources that will be meaningful in terms of shaping public opinion if we were to face an FMD outbreak. So the funding organizations are the three checkoff organizations: the beef checkoff, the pork checkoff, and the dairy checkoff, as well as a member association, American Sheep Institute. And we, check our competitive instincts at the door and sit at the table to work together to collaborate so that we can provide a unified front when talking to the public in the event of an animal disease situation. We also work really closely with industry partners across the board. We've created a message track that would speak to the public about the safety of milk and meat and the government and industry collaboration to contain the outbreak. And what I'm going to talk about is some consumer message testing that we used to validate the messages and determine how well they resonate. In the back of the room, I have handouts of the 4-page message track that is very clearly focused on your meat and milk is safe. The government and the industry are prepared and are working in coordination with each other to manage the outbreak. And then it goes through a series of tough questions about the eradication plan and about the need for euthanasia, because one of the hardest things to explain to the public is, this is such a significant threat to animal health, as Dr. Heath talked about yesterday, that we have to, kill animals in order to save more animals. So the message track's been developed, with sensitivity to, the disconnect that consumers will have there. Dr. Zach talked about goals, and I think the reason we're all here today is because we share the main goals of the FMD cross-species working group. And first and foremost, we want to protect animal health and minimize disease spread. And one of the ways that we are here to serve the government is to really get the word out to dairy producers and the whole dairy community, everybody who's moving milk and taking milk in and getting it into the retail venues. We will be able to activate our communication networks to be able to get good information in the hands of people that need to make operational decisions, on the producer side and also on the processor and milk movement and transportation side. So, first and foremost, we're, here to do that behind the scenes. My particular role and responsibility is in that public relations realm in terms of communicating to the consumer. And each of our respective commodity organizations and checkoffs have active consumer communications going on a daily basis. We've got a newsroom at DMI that we are investing in heavily right now to be able to have social media content that's meaningful to people and reaches hundreds and thousands of people on their Facebook feeds and whatnot. And those kinds of systems will be really important to activate in the event of an animal disease situation, where we'll be able to take the existing infrastructure and use it to amplify the government's messages about the safety of meat and milk and about the containment effort and how the successful containment effort and how the situation's being handled as well as it possibly could. And then our other goal is to prevent supply disruption to customers, part and parcel of business continuity, planning. We're invested in that. I think from a consumer confidence perspective, an empty dairy case just tells me as a consumer one thing, is that the milk is not safe. And so for those, the reasons of business continuity, but also to try and protect that confidence that people have on an everyday basis about the safety of their milk and meat, preventing supply disruption is a huge priority. And it's great to see all the progress that the Secure Milk Supply and other secure food supply initiatives have made over the past couple of years. So as a team, the foot and mouth disease cross-species team, we have a coordinated plan, and the communication plan includes things, that are typical communication activities, but probably things that you might not have at your fingertips that we want to be able to share, with people in this room who are going to be focused on managing the disease outbreak. We're going to be focused on monitoring the media coverage and assessing the nature of it in terms of, did they get it right, or are they misrepresenting things, and how can we intervene if they are misrepresenting things, and reach out to our media contacts and be able to have that conversation. And my job is really to get our top tier media in touch with people like you in this room who can lay out the facts and represent those facts so that we get more balanced media coverage. So we have a plan in terms of monitoring the media and the social media environment and intervening as the situation progresses. And we have a focused effort to have a joint message track. I mentioned that I have handouts for everybody at the back of the room, and that we've engaged in consumer testing of those messages. Mona's passing them out to understand, whether they raise more concerns than they answer, or how well they're resonating. And then, as a team, one of our main goals is to meet, people like you in this room, so that we have the technical experts that we can connect with reporters, and that we understand the government's plan so that we can relay that to the consuming public and key stakeholders. So over the last quarter of 2012, we invested in a significant research effort against those messages. We had last done a consumer research initiative in 2007, and the world has changed, and the methods of communicating with consumers have changed quite a bit. I think, what was Facebook introduced in 2006? 2007 you had print newspapers that were still in business. So things have changed, and we wanted to update the understanding that we had of people's awareness of foot and mouth disease. And, people like to think that they know more than they do, I guess, because most everyone in the quantitative phase of the research thought that they knew exactly what foot and mouth disease is, but then as you probe a little bit deeper, you realize that they are, in fact, talking about hand, foot, and mouth, and they think that they got a note home from their kids' daycare about it. So we looked very specifically at, the kind of waterfront of concerns and issues that a foot and mouth disease outbreak would bring from a public standpoint. Food safety first and foremost. We want to know how reassuring and believable our messages are that, your meat and milk are safe. The disease impact and management, how the disease would be contained, how it would be controlled in terms of euthanasia. And then we explored vaccinations quite extensively in this round of research, because we wanted to understand how the evolving operational plan that the government's, the USDA is managing, how that would play in the public domain. So it was a very extensive research project. I've been involved in consumer communication research on many topics, and this was probably the most extensive initiative I've been involved in. We actually started it out a little bit differently. Normally with this kind of research, we would start with focus groups, which is like, I don't know, maybe you've seen it in the Domino's commercials, you sit behind the glass and listen to people talk about a topic in like a facilitated discussion. We actually did the first round online, and we basically created like a private Facebook group, so people, even though they were strangers to each other, we could share an understanding of, what an outbreak would look like. We had a mocked up newscast that we showed them in this online forum, and then we probed them for their reactions and their discussion, and got a really good read on, how those messages were playing and what the points of confusion were. And then, as with all the scientists in the room, I don't need, to tell you that 40 people is not a representative sample of Americans. So we followed that up with an online survey. 1,000 Americans is kind of your standard quantitative survey to get a read on the consuming public and their opinions on things. And we stuck with people that consume meat and milk. We, thought that being our that would be our most important audience to be able to communicate these messages to. And So we probed them in a survey, and I'll share some details of those results. But we really weren't getting a lot of shades of distinction when we asked about vaccination. And I know that's a really important area to explore for a lot of folks in this room. So we kind of midstream in the research, we realized we needed to do an addendum to it, essentially. And we conducted these online focus groups, kind of like a video Google Hangout kind of thing, where we took some of the same people that were part of the bulletin board focus groups. So they had a month before, like an introduction to the whole mindset of an outbreak and a reminder of the kind of coverage that we were seeing in 2001. And then we really probed them, through a moderated forum on how they felt about vaccination of animals. So, I mentioned this at a minute ago that, when you ask people in a sort of day-to-day basis if they've heard of this disease, most people say they have, but then most people are actually confusing it with hand, foot, and mouth. We didn't test the distinction between hoof and mouth and foot and mouth, so maybe we'll need to do the next round on that. But people just assume that it's a disease that they've heard about, but most of them have heard of hand, foot, and mouth. When the outbreak scenario was described, people had questions about, where is the outbreak? Most consumers just want to know, is it in my backyard? And, if it's not, I'm not going to be concerned about it, and I can continue with my normal daily life. They want to know, though, the actions taken being taken by the industry and the government to contain the outbreak. They want, when they learn about the vaccine, it was, new news to everybody in our focus groups, but when they learn about a vaccine, they want to know what the approval process is like and just how comprehensive it is and how we know that the milk and meat are still safe to consume. And to some extent, they're interested in hearing the successful strategies in other countries to control the disease, and they are, of course, concerned about the process of euthanasia and the need for it. And they want to know what's going to happen to those carcasses when, in terms of disposal. The biggest difference we saw in the consumer mindset between 2007, when the last round of research that we had commissioned of this nature was conducted, and today, is just this information-seeking mentality that people have. You might see a 30-second news story, but people go to Google and they type in that one, keyword, and they're looking for more information. So, I think the biggest ask I have of all of you is, as you have good information, credible information, make sure it's posted on your university website. Make sure you get it to people like me who can activate our communication channels to get the word out there further. And, there's a delicate balance between overloading people with information. I sat here with no credentials to understand what Sarah was talking about, and I really, I couldn't play that back to a consumer except to say that, the government has strong capabilities, and they're always working to enhance those capabilities in terms of, diagnosis and being able to quickly respond to an outbreak. But as a consumer, I still want to know that stuff like what's going on in Sarah's backyard is happening, and if I Google it, I expect to be able to find those details, even though I'm not necessarily going to understand most of what's in a peer-reviewed scientific paper. As we looked at the array of messages, what people really focused on, after they were reassured that they didn't have to change their normal day-to-day, course of business, running to the grocery store or whatever, they wanted to hear about the containment. They kind of, accepted that it's not a public health threat. And these people, had access, since we were talking to them in that bulletin board format. We know that some of them actually, during the research, went and Googled, foot and mouth disease to find out more about it. And they really wanted to, be reassured through, proof, and experts all on the same page saying that it's not a public health threat. And then they really liked hearing about how the industry and government were working together to make sure that the situation, as significant as it was, that it was being kept under control. And so here's just a couple of the messages in terms of, people did show concern for the impact on the livestock community. Basically they want to know, though, can it be contained and how quickly can they contain it? And they want to know, when we're going to be out of the woods, basically. In terms of vaccinations, I'd say that most people were like a blank slate. Most people, when we probed on, when we first asked in like an unaided basis about the vaccination of livestock, it was like an unfamiliar concept. People who take their pets to the veterinarian and have their pets vaccinated then would sort of relate it to that and say, oh yeah, I guess that they probably do the same with animals on a farm. I've just never thought about it before. So I think there is then an opportunity to educate, more about preventive animal health in a, say peacetime day, as we talk to consumers more and more about where their food comes from and the practices that are in place to ensure that your milk is safe and that it's the animals on the dairy operation have been that the farmers are following animal care guidelines, et cetera. And people, once we explained in this research format that there's no food safety concern, most people were willing to accept that. About half, 55%, were kind of willing to just go with the concept that the vaccination makes the food that you eat safer to consume. Other people were skeptical, and other people were, just kind of had no opinion on the matter. So some people, as we expected, expressed concerns about the potential for the vaccine to have some kind of residue or, impact on human health. But it was like, kind of like the light bulb that went off was sort of like they would relate it to antibiotics and hormones, things that they were familiar with, and they would just kind of assume that you had similar concerns. So some people said they would avoid milk and meat entirely, vaccination notwithstanding, and a lot of, most people would, when they learn more about the process of vaccination and the fact that it's undergone, years of safety testing, people were supported. And the messages that we had developed with the help of Dr. Honglinger and a couple other experts that were involved in making sure that our messages were scientifically sound, it gave us an opportunity to kind of road test those messages and see that, yes, once people kind of got that basic education, then for the most part they were more reassured by that. And, helping people understand that people around the world eat, meat and from animals that are vaccinated. It was, not a familiar concept to anybody, but it really was reassuring to them. And they really wanted to see the proof that the meat and milk from vaccinated animals are safe. So the messages that we tested, did pretty well in terms of, reassuring people and helping people understand that there's, a really difficult situation that's going to affect, the livelihoods of our livestock community, but from a food safety perspective, people were reassured by the messages and proof points we have that the milk and meat are safe. So the research was really consistent with risk communication principles and best practices in terms of, people want to know that there's a plan in place. They want to know if there's any action that they can take. They're information seekers, so that we want to give them, USDA's website. We have a foot and mouth disease info.org website, and then we want to be, pushing them to all the good information that's being, generated by folks like you guys. And they want to understand that there's coordination and consistency in the approach, and they want credible sources of information. When we looked at the producers and veterinarians and government agencies, were the top sources that people would look to for reassurance and explanation of what's going on in the outbreak. And then, of course, with messaging, we want to be direct. We want to be writing at that third grade reading level so that we can get the USA Today reader kind of, mentality around this and help people understand, why it's significant, but why it doesn't mean that they need to change their milk and meat consumption. And, the best way to do that is to show proof, beyond our, basic message. We need to have the proof points in place and the documentation into place. And then from a media perspective and being able to be persuasive with the public, that human element is so important. That's why we train dairy farmers and train veterinarians across the country to speak to media and the public, because it's going to be so important to put a human face on the affected industry and be able to play that out for people in a way that's meaningful.